Sorry?
I now see a lot of people filling it in.
Cool. It's fine.
It's fine.
Okay, so thank you for your feedback. If you're still filling it in, you can continue so, but due to our time constraints, I will now continue with the lecture. Now you have all seen already in live how such a survey could look like. And obviously, you can also do such surveys not only in classical web browsers on your desktop computer, but for big companies, for example, Google is doing this all the time also in formats on a mobile app. And then you can also log more user data depending on the smartphone on the application, simply to improve all your products over a longer time. Now you could also say, well, I'm building a relatively simple web page. Conducting user tests, that's too much. is there not a simpler way actually to test if I'm doing everything correct? And yes, there is. So you could use usability heuristics actually to check if you have done everything correctly. And there are different kind of usability heuristics. You can either define your own ones, or there are common heuristics, actually what to check. And then the approach is you have a checklist. You give the checklist to usability experts, and they rate based on their experience and on the checklist in a kind of well-defined structure the usability of your web page. And this can be also partly be automated. So, for example, if you use colors that are matching, for example, on web page, this is something a program can actually check for you. And then you need a small number of actually people involved in this process, but the disadvantage is you don't get feedback from real users. So it's all a bit more abstract, more on a meta level, and you might not discover all specific things. So one of the most common heuristics is, again, by Nielsen. The status of the system should be visible. So, for example, it should be clear what you have put in your shopping basket on your web page. Match between the system and real world. So again, the metaphor of having a basket would be helpful for the user. The freedom of control for the user, simply that you can, for example, go back during the checkout process, that you can cancel a certain process. And then you should think about consistency and standards. In particular, if you have your own application, then it should be consistent in all different kinds of dialogues, but also think about what kind of standards are out there that might be relevant for your target group. So there are standards for web usability, for example, and you should follow them. And then, as we discussed, error prevention plays an important role. Think about how to help the user to not make errors, but also how to recover from errors. Then help the user actually to recognize things instead of recall. So try to lower the memory load of the user instead of, and the system helps you provide the information again instead of the user has to know it. And the flexibility, how efficient you would like to work, provide shortcuts, and also provide long navigation menus. Think about aesthetics, and also provide help to the user, provide documentation, even if it's better to have a system which explains by itself. So when we look now on what is the difference if we evaluate user experience on the web or not on the web, actually the difference is getting smaller and smaller because most of our applications are online all the time. But you can do stuff remotely, you can do things with users using your application in real life. But this is then also more challenging because you don't know your user group, it's more broad, you have no control about all the variables, and you have a limited control over the sample size. Simply, you just have to use the visitors on your website. On the other hand, the advantage is that you have real users, you might have a much higher number, and then you have the possibility just to get more insights into the behavior of the user. And just a short example by colleagues of mine, so what they started roughly 10 years ago, they implemented Android applications, games, simply to understand how people touch on smartphones, and they released it on the Google Play Store. The task was to tap on these bubbles, and they were interested, is there a pattern of an offset where you touch on the touch screen? And then you can say, oh, in particular in Android, you have so many uncontrolled variables, so they had 10,000 users on different kind of phones. But then you can also argue, if you have a so broad and large user base in your experiment, that this levels out in the end. And they were quite successful to find actually patterns of an offset on touchscreen devices in general. And then looking on how to get data, in particular on the web, what you can do, you can use web analytics and log files. So on server sides, you can log all things are happening on the website. And then you can capture actually how users navigate through with every time step, you know on which page a user stays how long. And then actually you can identify patterns and identify possible issues for users. And this is how such a log file looks like. And you have a user ID, you have the timestamp, you have the requested page or requested document, you have the site and you have where the user is coming from, and you have information about the web browser and the operating system. And then there are analytics tools providing you all the information you might be looking for in a nice aggregated way. To advance this, you can also use page tagging, so simply using JavaScript to get more information out of the user session. One of the most common product using this is Google Analytics, simply to get more information out of the log files, simply to get a more detailed understanding of the user. This could be then simply a longer history, how the user is navigating, different kinds of more information like screen resolution, screen size, and this could be then used actually to see where your user is coming from, how their navigation pattern looked like, and then you can debug actually your website. So for example, you detect the pattern that users often click first on one link, then go back and click on another link. Then it might be simply the case that it's not clear what to expect from these two links. So users could expect to go to page B when they click on link A. So the advantage of using weblogs is simply that you get a lot of statistical data from all kinds of users. You have broad visitors, all kinds of visitors you can log. You have objective measurements because you have statistical data automatically logged by the server or client-side by a JavaScript application. You have data from real users, and you can have this feedback actually in real time. On the other hand, you don't get any information about users' intention. You can guess about this, but there's no kind of you have an understanding what the user is actually looking for, what users need. And there might be privacy issues if you log a lot of data. And one of very popular privacy case was in 2006 when AOL published all search queries from users in the States. And what they did, they anonymized all user IDs by a random ID, but keeping the ID for all the same user over all search queries. And then the issues was actually what users often do, they look for their own names, they look for their friends' names, they look for the location where they're living. So a lot of people could be identified, even though there was no direct connection to their name. And people search all kinds of different things they might not want to share with the public. So all kinds of personal issues, health-related issues, you don't want to share but might search on the web. And simply, even though I'll quickly put this site down, there are still copies on the internet available. So think about if you publish something, it's extremely hard to get rid of it on the internet. And people might make you responsible for your actions. And thereby I would like to close my lecture almost and hand over to Jaco, who has a couple of announcements. But finally, I would like to ask you, so this was a quick remix of the HCI lecture I will give to you soon or a bit further during this year. I would like to know from you actually what was the most interesting aspect. What would you like to learn in the HCI lecture? So you can go to menti.com and enter what you would like to see.
Okay. Thank you very much, Lars. So I would like to use the last 2 minutes of the lecture
to tell you something about the assignments.
Do you need the screen?
Still your.
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, does it work? Yeah, it works. Like I said, this is the first year we try to do assignment 3 using Node.js and Express, right? So it's also for us a little experiment. So based on the lab sessions of yesterday and today, there were a few questions that came over and over again. And then if I, in that situation, my conclusion is this is my fault, right? And if all the students ask the same questions, then there's not sufficient information. So I just posted some tips that contain the answers to the questions that we got from many of you. So please have a look at that. So there are issues with people that don't understand their own shell, right? So there's no time in this course to teach you how a command line shell works, right? So I really need you to do that by yourself. There was a tip in the syllabus that I posted before the course started. You really need to have the basics of how to navigate in a command line shell, so that you know that there is a current working directory, and that you can go from one directory to another using the cd command, etc., etc. So if you have not mastered this skill, right, please do so as soon as possible, because you really need it in this assignment. There was also a request to supply a package.json file with all the necessary information that is required by the assignment with your application. And in the Zybook, there are tips on how to make this package.json file using the npm init command, right? So if you have not managed to make a package.json file, please check it out. Finally, I got questions about the SQL queries from people that did not find yet all the example SQL queries that we posted on Canvas. Right, so all the SQL that you need for this assignment is available on Canvas, and you can just copy paste whatever you need from there. And finally, and I think this is the hardest one to find, is that if you want to get the information out of the body that you send in your HTTP request from Postman, for example, to your server, then you need to get that information out of the request object, right? And you need some specific lines of code that are actually quite hard to find in the Zybook. They are there, but they're very hard to find. So apologies for that. These are the 2 lines that you would have needed. If you did not find these lines by yourself already, please check these out and make sure you have those. Okay, so that's for assignment 2. For assignment 4, right? So this is the only. This is the final assignment. It's also the only assignment we have not discussed so far. Right. So one is that you only have a couple of days to make this assignment. Right. So on Monday there will be the deadline for assignment 3, and then Wednesday evening is already the deadline for assignment 4. So first, be aware of this. Right. Alert. You don't have another week for assignment 4. Did you give me more words? So that's the bad news. The good news is assignment 4 is really, really less work than all the other assignments. Right? It's mainly reflective, looking back, and it gives you a chance to also fix the things you did wrong in assignment 1 and 2. Question here.
Yeah, why is assignment 4 due for Wednesday instead of like the weekend, like on Sunday?
That's also that's partly because I need the time to. And also my TAs the time to check this, and after the course is over, right, also the TAs are no longer available, and I'm also no longer available because I have another job. So that's part of the reason. So I want to give you a quick idea of what assignment 4 is. So can I have 1 more minute, then I'm done. So there are 2 parts in assignment 4, and both ask you to reflect on your own work that you did in the assignment 1 and 2. Right, so one is the evaluation where Lars just talked about, that uses these expert guidelines. Right, so that's maybe the easiest and most practical way to do an evaluation because you don't need real users, right? If you do a real user study in this course, that would take too much time. So we like to do an evaluation on the WWDC accessibility guidelines. And these are there's a lot of text, right? So don't make the mistake that you're going to read this entire specification. You only need a few rules, a few guidelines from this specification, and they are detailed in the assignment. So please stick only to the few guidelines that are mentioned and required in the assignment. So that's part one, and how to do that is also detailed in the assignment. And part two is that you go back and you look at the rubrics of assignment 1 and 2, and you try to understand what your TA thought could be improved on your website. Right, so both in the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript, and you assess what the impact of these limitations are, not from a technology perspective, but for the end user, right? So how does these errors that you make affect or not affect the end user? And then write a self-evaluation report using the guidelines of the assignment, right? And of course, there's also room to earn points to actually implement these improvements. But the focus is on the report, both of the evaluation in terms of the accessibility guidelines and in terms of your own assessment based on the TA guidelines. Is that clear?
Then I would like to show the last slide again.
Okay, I want to give Lars the opportunity to show his final slide again, so please go ahead. If there are questions about the lab, please ask them during the lab sessions tomorrow and on Friday. Tomorrow I will discuss in detail all the issues about the exam. Right, so if you have questions about the exam, please come to the lecture tomorrow, and I hope to clear them up during the lecture tomorrow.
Okay, so I don't want to keep you any longer here because then you would like to leave now this dark lecture room, but just to give you your feedback back, we will discuss this together in the HCI lecture where we see us next. I think a lot of things we will cover, so we will definitely talk about usability, privacy and security, we will talk about studies, we will talk about computers, we will also talk about ethics. There's a separate lecture about social interaction with robots, so I might not touch deeply on the robot aspect, but I think most of the other aspects we will discuss in the HCI lecture, and I will give you the opportunity to discuss with me this slide in the first session. Thank you very much and have a nice day.